It's time. Sleepers, breakouts, and busts 1.0 up next on a Kokomo Friday.
Alcantara, Soroka, you look so good in Boca. Peralta, Manoa, bounce back for Arandola. Giolito, Castillo, Yoshida, Moses, Carlo, and Fado. Value so high, but ADP so low. Frank Love's hit some kind of show. Now let's get on with the show.
Happy Kokomo Friday and welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on January 31st. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, Sleepers, Breakouts, and Busts 1.0. Yes, there was a bunch of news that came out in the past couple days. Max Scherzer to the Blue Jays, Carlos Estevez to the Royals, Ha-Sung Kim to the Rays. But we did a bonus podcast earlier in the day.
You guys did.
Chris and I broke down all the moves. So if you want to hear our thoughts on that, be sure to check it out.
Yeah, this is my fourth podcast of the day, you know?
You know, Scott, if you really do want to react to those moves.
Not really.
We can make it one of the FBT Express episodes.
I'm upset about Estevez blocking Lucas Urseg, who I think is way better.
Yeah.
Nobody's happy about it.
But really, that's all I have to say about those three moves. So we could do the Express, whatever.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's why we did that bonus episode, is so that we could just focus on sleepers, breakouts, and busts. Wanted to give that the time that it deserves, and obviously give this podcast the time this deserves as well. Chris, start us off here. Your favorite sleeper in 2025.
There are so many options to go with, but I picked Brandon Lau as my favorite sleeper because I'm very excited. I think he's just kind of perpetually underrated at this point because he's going to miss some time with injury over the past couple of seasons, and he's been disappointing since that 39 homer season. But man, this guy, when he's on the field, is still a really, really productive hitter, a rare source of power at the single hardest position to find any power in the modern game, and that's second base. Brandon Lau has 21 homers in each of the past two seasons. Last year, there was only one player who had more than 25. I think Brandon Lau was third at the position in home runs with 21, despite missing 55 games. So I'm very excited about him regardless. But then you add in the fact that the Rays are going to be playing half their games at Georgia M. Steinbrenner Field. Really, they're going to be playing 90, right, of their 162 games at that field because they play two series against the Yankees in 87 games because Georgia M. Steinbrenner Field has the same dimensions as Yankee Stadium. That's what I was going for.
All right.
Very, very friendly for left-handed power. I don't think you should expect Brandon Lau to get to 39 homers again. That's probably an outlier, but a 30-homer season if he plays 130 games, that's realistic.
I mean, if he stays healthy and if the Rays don't sit him too often against left-handers, very big ifs I would bet against. But if that were to happen, he's Pete Alonso at second base.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's not that big of a difference between them. And I get where you're saying, oh, he can't stay healthy, I'm never drafting him, and blah, blah, blah. But his ADP is 239. He's the 22nd second baseman off the board. Behind, I don't dislike Colt Keith. Brandon Lau's better than Colt Keith. He's better than Brendan Donovan. I guess if you what are we doing? Gleyber Torres is ahead of him. Gleyber Torres is in the worst park in baseball for his skill set. Yeah. I think Brandon Lau I am ranking him as a top 12 second baseman.
Me too.
Now, if you don't draft him that way, that's fine. You don't have to. But that is me planting my flag and saying, I think this guy, whenever he's on the field, is going to be a top 12 second baseman.
The Fantasy Pros ADP, by the way, you mentioned, I believe it was NFBC, Chris. Fantasy Pros is 216.8. So not far off, a little bit higher, but still outside the top 200 clearly. As the 19th second baseman off the board, you two both rank Brandon Lau as a top 12 second baseman heading into the season. Scott, over to you for your favorite breakout here in 2025.
Well, I'm going to pick another second baseman because, strangely enough, second basemen are universally undervalued, even though that's the weakest position. I'm scratching my head over why that's the case, but Jordan Westberg is my favorite breakout.
Clean sweep across the board.
Mhm.
Breakout for all three of us.
Yeah, and I say favorite in terms of he's the one I'm most likely to draft. There are others that maybe I'm personally drawn to more, but they're just going to be hard to draft. Westberg, very easy to draft. He's going just inside the top 100. I think my initial rankings had him 30 spots higher than that. 92nd percentile XBA and X slug last year with an average exit velocity that was on par with Kyle Tucker and Bryce Harper. And really, if you just project last year's numbers over 150 games, you get pretty far that way. 25 homers, 88 RBI. But that was with him being a right-handed hitter in the Camden Crater. And you may have heard the Orioles are moving the fences back in and left quite a bit. It should play much better for right-handed power, especially for a guy who hits the ball as hard as Bryce Harper from the right side. And this would just be a bonus, but Westberg also has 91st percentile sprint speed. So if he were to start running too, I mean, he might be a top 40 player overall if he were to start doing that. Don't need him to do that to live up to his ADP, though.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
to exceed his ADP.
You mentioned the ADP for Jordan Westberg is 94 right now. He is the 6th second baseman off the board. And I was going to say kind of represents an island. There's a drop off. Like Semion's ADP is 63.6. Then Westberg is going about 30 picks later. Matt McLean is 8 picks on average behind Westberg. I think we all very clearly would rather
rather have Westberg than McLean.
Yeah. And then the next second baseman after that is Bryce Terang at 119. So it does drop down a couple of rounds after that as well. Jordan Westberg does have third base eligibility as well. And I've noticed throughout drafts, if I wait, it kind of offers you that flexibility because then you could just move him to second or third, depending on whichever position has a better value later on in the draft. So if you like the second baseman, in round 10, 11, 12 or beyond, then you could just move Westberg to third or vice versa. And then you could just take a third baseman. So it does offer some flexibility within the draft as well. So I do like that for Jordan Westberg. I am going to bring up a bust. Chris had a sleeper. Scott had a breakout.
That's how it works.
I will mention the player I'm probably most likely to avoid this season is Hunter Green. And this is going to rub some people the wrong way. Hunter Green is awesome to watch. I mean, he's one of the most electric arms in baseball. I love watching the guy pitch. I'm not rooting against him, but just seems pretty risky to draft Hunter Green, just given his profile and the injury history that he has had so far. He was awesome last season. There's no doubt about that. He did a phenomenal job limiting hard contact. His average exit velocity year over year from 23 to 24 dropped almost 3 miles per hour. So he legitimately improved in that regard. How sticky is that? How sticky is that year over year? Will he maintain that? Chris, you bring this up all the time. Dylan Cease in his breakout season, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago when he had the sub 2.5 ERA, great quality of contact numbers. The next year he came back, it was an issue again for him. So that doesn't necessarily mean that will happen to Hunter Green as well, but he's a fly ball pitcher in the most homer-friendly park in all of baseball in Cincinnati. And the injury history. Last year, Hunter Green went on the IL with an elbow sprain. He also has issues with his shoulder in the past as well. The ADP, 92.4, SP 26, not egregious.
It's fine, yeah.
I have him SP 34, and I think me ranking him that low, I'm probably just not going to wind up with Hunter Green at all.
Well, I respect you calling Hunter Green a bust. Even acknowledging the value is fine, because I don't think a bust necessarily has to be a bad value pick. It just has to be somebody with the potential to out and out collapse. And I think Green has that. It does seem like I'm not hearing a lot of enthusiasm for Hunter Green. Like this is, since the start of his career, this is the least enthusiastic the drafters as a whole have been for him, which I find a little strange because he had a 1.09 ERA in his last 10 starts. So you'd think people would be celebrating that more, but they're not. And I guess they probably shouldn't be. So I don't have Hunter Green as a bust, but I respect it, Frank.
Yes, Hunter Green. I did want to just quickly look up his ADP from last year. It was 141. So now it's inside the top 100. So while, we don't hear that much excitement, he's going higher than he was last offseason. And I will admit, like, the range of outcomes, if he repeats what he did last year, he could be an awesome breakout pick, and maybe he's a top 12 starting pitcher. But I do think there's legitimate bottom out potential here if he gets hurt, or if, quality of contact is bad and control is a problem once again. So for all those reasons, I am avoiding Hunter Green. By the way, before we get into all the other names, all of our sleepers, breakouts, and busts articles are live on the website, cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball. We're not going to get to every single name today because we all wrote about 36 names total. So just not enough time to get to them on this podcast. So if you want to see our full list and descriptions and write-ups for all these players, they are on the website. So I thought that I would get that out of the way. I want to promote a few other things before we hit a break. Our buddy Nick Pollock, he has his annual PitchCon this weekend. You can watch a bunch of baseball and fantasy baseball panels, discussions, presentations, pitcherlist.com/PitchCon. And he's just has a live stream going all weekend long, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Scott and Chris already presented on Thursday, so hopefully you had a chance to check that out. I will be on Sunday talking MLB power rankings at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So if you want to check that out, feel free. And of course, Nick does this as a way to raise money for charity. So if you have the means, please donate if you can. 100% of all donations from PitchCon will be going to ALS1. So Nick's goal is to raise $10,000 to help with ALS research. Make sure to check it out this weekend. It's going to be fun. Plus, I wanted to provide an update on our programming schedule moving forward. Starting next week, February, 5 podcasts per week will be live on YouTube Sunday through Wednesday evenings, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. And then Thursday, we'll pre-record a mailbag podcast that will come out on Friday. So you will have an audio podcast in your feed every Monday through Friday starting next week until the end of the baseball season. So from February through September, beginning of October, you will be hearing a lot of us. And if you want to send a mailbag question in, you can either email fantasybaseball@cbsi.com. That's the letter I, or leave us a 5-star rating on Apple. Drop a question in the review. Okay, that's it. I swear. It was like 3 minutes worth of promotion. Way too much. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today, Sleepers 1.0. Chris, we are starting things off with you, Kristian Campbell of the Red Sox, who I also have as a sleeper, but tell us why. Why you in?
Well, part of it is just that right now you can get him for basically free if you're drafting. And I think by mid-March, he's going to be a top 150 pick because I tend to think he's just going to win the second base competition for the Boston Red Sox. Look, they're going to give Vaughn Grissom a chance. I'm sure they don't want to give up on him after one injury-plagued season, but Kristian Campbell is one of the fastest rising prospects in baseball. He had a monster season, does pretty much everything you want well. Good athleticism, great approach at the plate, hits a ton of line drives, hits for some power. Had a 997 OPS in 115 games while getting all the way up to AAA. Now, it was only 19 games AAA. Maybe the Red Sox want to get him a little more seasoning. I'm not sure, but it sounds like, I believe the report was Vaughn Grissom and Kristian Campbell are going to focus on second base this spring training. And Vaughn Grissom probably has the lead. Vaughn Grissom is very much capable of losing that lead to Kristian Campbell, and I think he can be one of these rookies that everyone's clamoring for by the time the season starts. I'm very excited about the skill set here.
Yeah, I am excited for all the same reasons. Obviously, being a right-handed bat in Fenway helps. He makes a lot of contact. He hits a lot of line drives. There's power. There's speed for Kristian Campbell. One thing that you brought up, Chris, back when we did our New Year's resolutions is cooling it with the rookies.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. I mean, some of the helium the past couple of years, Wyatt Langford going inside the top 75 picks by the time we got to the, second or third week of March. Julio Rodriguez a couple years before that wound up being like a top 100 pick when everything was said and done. Obviously, we love the ADP now for Kristian Campbell, which is outside the top 300. But if he starts to hit in spring and we start to get an inclination that he is going to start at second base, then he's going to move up. Let's just take it easy. Like if he's, around 200 in ADP,
perfectly fine. Closer
to 150, all right. But like the closer we get to 100 and beyond, that's when we got to like take a step back and, all right, maybe we cool it a little bit on the rookies. But, assuming the ADP is fine, then I do agree on Kristian Campbell as a sleeper. Scott, over to you. Bo Bichette. Some people might be saying, what the heck, Bo Bichette? I mean, this is one of the premier players in the game. How can he be a sleeper? And to that, you would say?
Well, yeah, I agree. I don't know how we've gotten to this point that Bo Bichette is going as late as he is in drafts. I used to, as recently as last year, I thought he was overrated for fantasy, but he was going in round 3 last year. And now he's being drafted around 140. He's being drafted in the same vicinity as Anthony Volpe. And the only explanation I can see for that is that he hit 225 last year. So what? He was hurt the whole time. He had calf issues. He was on the IL 2 times with that same injury. He clearly wasn't right. And you look at the track record for Bo Bichette, he had never hit less than 290 in his 5-year career before hitting 225 last year. He entered the year, his career average was 299. He was as safe a source of batting average as you can find. And he's not even 27 yet. Like, he's still early in his prime, and people are just writing him off like this. It's totally bizarre to me. I brought up Volpe, him being drafted around there. Volpe is a for sure liability in batting average. So what are you doing? Like, it simply boggles the mind, and it tells me that people think Bo Bichette is catastrophically broken, but I don't see the evidence for it. Even if you want to dig into the data more and not just assume it was health related, the core metrics haven't really changed. He wasn't swinging and missing pitches inside the zone more often. He wasn't chasing pitches more often. He was hitting the ball pretty much as hard as usual. It was down a little bit from the previous year, but it wasn't like in 2020, his quality of contact numbers were similar. We've seen him thrive with quality of contact numbers like that before. So I think I think we just need to chalk it up as a lost season and have some measure of faith that given his youth, that the track record is going to reassert itself this year.
I have a theory.
Shoot.
Bo Bichette had a fine season in 2023. But like the triple slash line was basically identical to what you expect. He had 306, OPS north of 815, I think. The problem was he only had, 69 runs and 73 RBI. So he was only the number 9 second base or shortstop in fantasy that year. And then he has this disastrous 2024 where everything goes wrong. So I think it's 2 years in a row of subpar production. But I think the subpar production in 2023 is just a fluke.
It's very similar to that Carlos Correa 2022 season.
And even if you think this Blue Jays lineup is closer to average than really good, like it was at their best, I still think the leadoff hitter for this lineup is going to be a 90-90 guy. And so I'm really, as long as he's good, and I have a lot of faith that he will be. So that's where, like, even the projections that like him, like the bat has him bouncing back to hit 280. It's only 74 runs and 72 RBI. And so that's where, like, I think that's what's keeping his price down. I'm fine. Keep his price down. He should be a top 100 pick.
And on top of all of that, Bo Bichette is entering a contract year at 27 years old, and he cut his hair. I have to reiterate this. Remember what Vlad Jr. did last year when he cut his hair in June. He became one of the best hitters in all of baseball. You know what? I have a theory for you. The hair has been weighing these guys down. So you know what? They cut the hair. They become amazing. Obviously, I'm kidding, but I mostly agree with you guys for the reasons you mentioned on Bo Bichette. I guess if you're playing the downside game with Bichette, he has suffered a lot of injuries to his right leg. So, the calf multiple times last year. He has dealt with a lot of issues with his knee, his right knee. He also went on the IL a couple years ago with a right quad strain. So maybe his right leg is just shot. And if that's the case, then he might just be a shell of his former self.
At 26, and he's
look,
still a plus defender at shortstop.
There are guys that like Grady Sizemore, Rocco Baldelli, Nick Markakis is probably
he had his
it's
best
possible
defensive year last
but
year.
yeah, I'm not that worried about
I
it.
think it was his best. It was close to his best.
I don't think that, but I'm sure the people who are drafting him around 140 or later are probably bringing that up as a reason for pessimism for Bichette. Chris, back to you. Another sleeper here. Let's get into some pitching talk. You have Nick Lodolo of the Reds.
Nick Lodolo, who, if you remember, through the first 3 months of last season was phenomenal. Had a 2.76 ERA with 70 strikeouts and 65 innings in his first 11 starts of the season. Averaged right around 6 innings per start, was going deep, was pitching effectively. And then he had a blister in his 12th start. He came back after about 2 weeks and stunk. He was terrible. And then his season ended with a ligament issue in his finger. And he admitted at the end of the season that the blister never really got right. And he just couldn't grip his curveball specifically. And that ended up leading to the ligament issues with his finger. And he was just horrible. 7.54 ERA over his final 9 games, 6 home runs in 45 innings, 49 strikeouts. He just wasn't any good. Wasn't the guy he looked like at his best. I just don't think he was healthy. And I think when Nick Lodolo is healthy, he can be very, very good. His whiff rate on his curveball was down below 35% after that as well. So I just think there's a lot to like about Nick Lodolo at a price where it doesn't matter if things go wrong, right? Like he's being drafted, I believe, still outside of the top 200.
His ADP on Fantasy Pros
252.6 at NFBC.
231 on Fantasy Pros, SP63.
Yeah, there is no downside if things go wrong there. You can just drop him. And there are not a lot of pitchers, even in a deep pitching pool, who have the kind of upside that Nick Lodolo has shown across multiple seasons.
Yeah, you know what? This range of starting pitcher outside of the top 200, there are just so many interesting names here. And Arrighetti, who we're going to talk about shortly, Bowden Francis, I wrote up as a sleeper. He was maybe the best pitcher in baseball over the final 2 months. Nick Lodolo, Jesus Luzardo in this range. Reese Willson going later than that. Like, you can grab 3 or 4 pitchers early-ish, top 30, top 40 starting pitchers, and then just wait and load up on a bunch of interesting.
That's probably what I'm going to do
later on. So yeah, I totally see it there with Lodolo. He has the talent. Now we need him to stay healthy, obviously, but going outside the top 200, there's not much risk drafting him at that point. Scott, back over to you, where we have Isaac Paredes, and I can't for the life of me. He has moved up. I can't understand. The NFBC ADP early in the offseason was 275, something like that, when Paredes was on the Cubs. He gets traded to the Astros, which is a match made in heaven. And the ADP moves up to just inside the 200. It feels like he should be a top 150, maybe top 125 pick right now.
I have 132. Yeah, his ADP has gone up since moving, but not nearly enough. If you look at his spray chart, you can understand why a guy who has 3rd percentile exit velocity readings, the tiniest little icicle on his baseball savant page for quality of contact, you can understand why he's been like a 25 to 30 homer guy, because so many balls are hit right at that left field foul pole, the easiest place for a right-handed hitter to put it out. Paredes basically lives there.
Except for Wrigley Field.
Except for Wrigley Field. That ruined him. So the left field corner in Tropicana Field is one of the closest, 315 feet away from home plate. At Wrigley Field, it's one of the furthest, 355 feet. And we predicted it would kill him once he was traded to the Cubs, and it did. In his 2.5 years with Tampa, Paredes homered once every 21 plate appearances. In his half year with the Cubs, it was once every 71 plate appearances. Okay, that's his past. Now he gets traded to Houston. You ever heard of the Crawford boxes?
I have.
It is the most inviting place for a right-handed hitter to hit. That left field foul pole, just like Tropicana Field, 315 feet, but it remains shallow all the way to straightaway center. So even if Paredes is a little off the mark and aiming for that foul pole, he's still very likely to put it out at that ballpark. It is a match made in heaven. I think he's basically going to be Alex Bregman there. Alex Bregman may be the player he's replacing. I don't know. There's talk they could maybe bring Bregman back and play Paredes at second. But I even if they don't bring Bregman back, I think they already have his replacement. Bregman hit 26 home runs last year. Paredes' expected home run number in Houston last year was 26. And you look at batting average profile similarly. I assume he would occupy a similar spot in the lineup, runs an RBI. I think he's basically going to be Bregman. Mm-hmm. And obviously he's not being drafted like that. He's being drafted about 100 spots lower than Bregman. So I am taking that all day. I would say Isaac Paredes is my favorite sleeper of all, in part because we already know it works for him.
Yeah, we've seen it. We have a proof of concept here. He was a top 70 hitter in 2023.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And people might be wondering, listening, for years now, we have been poo-pooing Isaac Paredes and we haven't been fans of him. But when he was in the ballpark that was conducive to this skill set, he proved that he can do it multiple times. And then when he went to Chicago, obviously it didn't work because that was a bad ballpark. But we've seen it, and now he's joining an even better lineup. He's going to hit in the top half of this Astros lineup, somewhere among Altuve and Yordan Alvarez, and if they bring back Bregman, but he's going to be somewhere in that mix. So counting stats are there. And even in NFBC January ADP, 193 for Paredes, 60 picks later than Bregman, and 80 picks behind Jake Berger, which I can't get it. I can't get it. So, I think a totally fine fallback. If you miss out on your third base targets early on, just kind of wait and snag Isaac Paredes a little bit later on. Chris, back over to you for another pitcher. I mentioned the name Spencer Arrighetti. This is another one. Clean sweep across the board. I think I have him as a breakout. Scott either has him as a sleeper or a breakout as well, and you have him here as a sleeper.
I am surprised his price is as low as it is, given how well Spencer Arrighetti finished the season. We've talked about it a ton. 3.31 ERA, 118 WHIP over his final 15 starts. The walk rate cut almost in half. Strikeout rate 11 per 9. He was awesome. He's got the swing and miss pitches, 3 of them at least a whiff rate of over 37%. My theory as to why Spencer Arrighetti is not getting the love that he deserves is because I think I've mentioned this recently, but I'll do it again. Remember last year at the beginning of August, he went up against the Rays and Red Sox and had 25 strikeouts across 2 starts. And I believe the next week he had the White Sox, and he was like the number 1 waiver wire target. Everyone's like, this is the guy who's going to carry us, like huge week. It might've been a 2-start week even. And he had the White Sox and he gave up 4 runs in 5 2/3 innings. Terrible start. Super disappointing. Then his next 2 starts, he strikes out 17 over 13 2/3 shutout innings against the Orioles and Phillies. And it's like, all right, we're back, baby. Spencer Arrighetti, we're going to ride him to a championship in September. And he opens the month of September at Cincinnati with 2/3 of an inning, 9 runs, 3 earned. I think originally it was 6 earned and 3 of them came off because of an error. And I think a lot of people he was dead to them. And I think we can take advantage of that because Spencer Arrighetti is available for outside of the top 200 overall in drafts right now. And like I said, for most of the second half of the season, he was just really good.
Yeah.
And the control got better. He figured out the fastball command, and the stuff is really, really good.
So since I co-signed to this, I want to add a few things. But my theory is just he had a 4.53 ERA and 1.41 WHIP overall, which is terrible.
Yeah,
a lot of people just surface level analysis. This guy stinks. but obviously way better of those last 10 appearances. Again, the numbers were 272 ERA, 117 whip, 11.4 K per nine. His fastball is mush, but he began to shy away from it. His curveball and sweeper are basically untouchable. I think it's legit. My favorite Spencer Arrighetti stat, he had more double-digit strikeout efforts last year than either Tarek Skubal or Paul Skeens.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. He had 4 of them, to be exact. And look, there's going to be control issues, control concerns there. I'm not saying he's an ace, but it turns out you could draft him as like your 6th starter.
Yeah.
And, I probably would have been happy with him as my 4th starter going into the draft prep process.
And the Astros just typically do a pretty good job with pitching development. We just saw it last year in season with Arrighetti and across the full season with Hunter Brown and Ronel Blanco. I mean, those guys were both awesome last year for the Astros. Great team, great run support. I think we're all in agreement here on Spencer Arrighetti. Scott, back to you. I'm going to pair 2 hitters together, both going well outside the top 200. Ryan Mountcastle with the Orioles. Again, they're pulling the left field in Camden Yards. And Michael Conforto, who is now with the Dodgers.
Okay. So Mountcastle, I'm a little surprised he's gotten so little attention given the announcement of them moving the fences back in. So 3 years ago, they Orioles, for basically the entire length of left field, moved the fences back 30 feet. It was insane. I keep referring to it as the Camden Crater because right-handed hitters, they just were totally ruined by it. Mountcastle, chief among them, he hit 33 home runs the year before they did that. Obviously hasn't come close since, even though his exit velocities have gone way up. He hits the ball sort of like teammate Jordan Westberg, very hard, very hard. He should be hitting more home runs just based on that. And if he had played in a more neutral environment like Nationals Park in Washington over the last 3 years, he would have in fact hit 14 more home runs. So I think it's going to be a more neutral park now with the fences being readjusted at Camden Yards in 13 feet in some places, 26 feet in others. With the exit velocities Mountcastle produces, I think a 25 to 30 homer season is well within reach, and that would be in a great upstart lineup. His ADP is around 250.
Yep.
And first base, we've talked about it. If that's a position where if you're not intentional about it, it can quickly pass you by. I think at least in roto leagues, Mountcastle makes for a great fallback option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good call, especially even if you just play in 12-team roto leagues as a corner infielder, you're already got your first baseman. Yeah, like 20 to 25 home runs with the upside to maybe get to 30 if everything works out for Mountcastle. I think that's totally fine. Scott, what about Conforto here?
Yeah, so Conforto, I'll try to distill this here. The Dodgers obviously saw fit to sign him, and the Dodgers can bring in anybody they want. They decided to make Conforto their everyday left fielder.
It was like the first move they made.
And you don't have to dig very deep to understand why. He hit 20 home runs last year. Only 3 at home, which you may have heard is a difficult place to hit, especially for left-handers. 17 of Conforto's 20 home runs came on the road. And his exit velocity is 90.2 mile per hour average, 113.6 mile per hour max. It's the highest they had been in years. He basically had a bounce back season after years working his way back from shoulder troubles. It just got consumed by that giant park in San Francisco. And now he's in a loaded lineup to top things off. The Dodgers GM has talked about them having faith in him playing against left-handers. His numbers don't look bad against left-handers. So I think Conforto is going to be an everyday player in the most star-studded lineup after a bounce-back season that wasn't properly appreciated. This just seems like a tailor-made sleeper to me.
Yeah, Conforto could wind up having one of these like Nick Castellanos, Lourdes Gurriel type seasons where he hits 250, 260, 25-ish home runs. Even if he's batting 7th in the Dodgers lineup, stacked lineup, counting stats should be there for Conforto. So yeah, at ADP 300, 74th outfielder off the board. I mean, you play in any 5 outfielder league, Conforto should be on your radar. The ADP for Mountcastle, by the way, was 247 as the 24th first baseman off the board. Quickly mention your last 2, Clay Holmes for Scott as an ADP of 281.6. He is a SPARP on CBS. He signed with the Mets this offseason. He is a reliever converted starter. Not exactly sure how it's going to work, but the Mets obviously did great things with pitching development last year. And for Chris, a SPARP here, Mike Soroka. Mike Soroka. That's
sleeper.
right. That one. The ADP
Extremely deep.
572. So, I think you're only really drafting in points leagues, last round pick, something like that. As a SPARP, has that RP eligibility, but signed with the Nationals this offseason. And it sounds like we'll be given a chance to start for Washington.
Can I say for Clay Holmes,
Yes,
65% ground ball rate last year, and that's been the norm for him. The only full-time starting pitcher that really compares to that is Framber Valdez. You look at his time in the Yankees bullpen, a 269 ERA, 314 ERA last year. Run prevention was never Holmes' problem. I just think a lack of missed bats and enough ground balls sneaking through caused stress in the 9th inning. It really put a microscope on it because it was at the point when the game was on the line. But over an extended stretch, if he's a 65% ground ball guy, I think he'll basically be Framber Valdez just without the volume.
All right, I'll quickly mention 3 names that I have on my sleeper list that I'm pretty excited about. Matt Shaw, the top prospect with the Chicago Cubs. Look, the third base job is his as long as he does not fall flat on his face this spring. There's power, there's speed. I think he should be able to play every day, makes a lot of contact, hits a lot of line drives. The ADP, even in January at the NFBC, 212. So this is another one like Kristian Campbell, as long as the ADP doesn't get out of control, around 200, maybe in that 150 to 200 range. Let's take a shot on Matt Shaw for a little bit of power and speed. Jesus Luzardo, it just fits the bill. Perfect sleeper because last year, the ADP top 100 pick. This year, he's 250, 260 in that range. Traded over to the Phillies. It's a worse ballpark to pitch in, obviously, but a much better team. The context, the run support, lots of injury risk. The floor is very low for Jesus Luzardo, but we know what the upside is. In 50 starts between 2022 and 23 for Luzardo, 348 ERA, 115 whip, 10.6 K per 9 for Jesus Luzardo. And Reese Olson, last name I'll mention here. I think he's legit good. He's 25 years old. He's entering his prime. He made improvements last year. Did have a shoulder thing, so that adds a layer of risk. But the ADP is 280 for Olson. It's a great park to pitch in. Improving Detroit Tigers team. So yeah, I like what we've seen. He's got 2 great whiff pitches. I think if he moves away from that fastball a little bit, we could get a nice season out of Reese Olson.
Yeah, I co-signed to Olson.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. All right, let's take our final break. When we return, we'll get into breakouts right after this.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
Welcome back in Breakouts 1.0. Chris, Willson Contreras. We know this guy. How's he going to break out?
Because he's going to play every day. Because he's a first baseman now. And what I love about this one is it's kind of a twofer because Ivan Herrera is also one of my favorite sleepers at catcher. And I'm fine with just those 2 as my catchers this season. Willson Contreras, he's been a very, very good hitter throughout his career, regardless of what position you'd play him at. But since getting to St. Louis, his 150 game pace, 263 average, 25 homers, 7 steals, actually decent there. And then 74 runs, 74 RBI. That's fine for a catcher, but I would hope for a little more. And I think we can get that. Look, he's 33, I think, or will be 33 soon. So I'm not necessarily saying Willson Contreras is just going to play 162 games, but an outcome where he hits pretty similar to his brother, William, not totally out of the question, given the playing time he's going to get as a starting first baseman. So I'm very excited about Willson Contreras.
Yeah, love this call as well. He's definitely dealt with a lot of injuries throughout his career, Willson Contreras. Last year, mostly unlucky, a fractured left forearm, I believe on a backswing from while he was catching, and then a fractured right finger in August, which basically shut his season down. So pretty unlucky last season. And maybe playing first base will allow him to stay healthy, because obviously you're not crouching all the time, and it should help overall. So that's the case, and obviously the playing time upside there for Contreras. The ADP for him on Fantasy Pros is 101 as the 6th catcher off the board. It is much higher on NFBC, 78. So if you draft there, you are going to have to go a little bit higher to get Willson Contreras on your team. All right, over to Scott for a breakout. And look, I know we're all friends here. You guys got to keep things civil. I'll give you the opportunity to tell people.
I won't talk until the bus this time.
No.
You can talk.
Let's do it now. Let's get it out of the way.
This is the podcast to talk it out. Lawrence Butler.
Scott is a fan of Lawrence Butler, breakout this season, and Chris has as a bust. So, Scott, give us the breakout case on Butler.
Well, let me first say that if we're talking value, I don't know that Chris and I are necessarily going to be far apart. To me, where Butler is going off the board is right at the tipping point. If somebody wants to grab him 65th overall, I'm probably out. If he lasts to 80, it's probably me who takes him. So he's like right at the tipping point. But regardless of whether he gets priced out of my range or not, I think he has blow up potential. And so I really want to stress that. And that's why I'm calling him a breakout instead of a sleeper. It's not the value isn't stressed in under the breakout umbrella. But anyway, Lawrence Butler, to sum up, he was a modest producer in the minors, had some decent numbers, but wasn't a highly regarded prospect. The under the hood stats were pretty impressive, though. Specifically, he hit the ball hard, struck out too much, kind of a typical story. But that all changed after he returned to the majors at the end of June. He worked with director of hitting Darren Bush to make some mechanical tweaks, eliminating excess movement and staying back on the ball better. So it wasn't something he figured out in the minors. He came back to the majors and they figured it out right then. And from July 1st on, Lawrence Butler hit 302, 20 homers, 14 steals, 943 OPS. He cut his strikeout rate from 30.7% before that to 20.6% after that. Vast improvement. And, that was half a season's time. The pace was 40 homers, 28 steals, basically. So we're talking huge upside. The strikeouts improved, like I said. Is it possible that after an off season, he'll come back and slip into those bad habits again and they'll have to work on a swing all over again? Yeah, that's possible. But I do think the fix was legitimate. And if it does stick, then he could put up first round numbers.
Yeah. I did a piece last week for the newsletter where I wrote about first round contenders for 2026, I guess is the way to put it. And Butler was on the list. I can see a path to a 30-25, 35-25 outcome for Lawrence Butler, where he's just an absolute monster. We saw it in the second half, like Scott said. The thing for me, it comes down to price. Mm-hmm. That's all it comes down to. And this is why, the breakouts, I like writing about a breakout because price doesn't matter. And you can go wild. This is the guy's going to have a career year or whatever you want to say. Busts for me are all about price. And it's this top 65 pushing ADP that he's at in the month of January is where I just can't get on board, especially when earlier in the offseason he was like 80th or even lower.
No, he's closer to 100.
Well, he's closer to 100 in October.
Yeah.
And when you go month by month, the picture's a little less clear that it was like a clear breakout. It's monster July. He had a 1210 OPS in the month of July. Good August. He had an 889 OPS. Hit for a lot of power. The plate discipline was really bad in August. September and a game in October, whatever it was, 739 OPS. The power really was not there. I think it was 2 home runs in the final month. Plate discipline remained pretty mediocre. This is 4 full months of Lawrence Butler in 2024. 2 of them were good. 1 was terrible. 1 was pretty mediocre. That's not a top 65 pick, especially not in an era where speed is easy to find, in an era where outfielders are plentiful like they are in 2025. It just comes down to the price. It's sticker shock for me. And look, maybe he'll be it, but I look at, then you start to look at, we're at the point in the season where some of the projection systems are starting to come out. Steamer dropped early and had him 29 homers, 21 steals, 255 average, 170 combined runs and RBI. And it's like, oh yeah, Lawrence Butler is top 70 pick. Well,
I think you could do better than that.
ATC's 24 and 19. All right, that's not bad. Probably not worth that price. Oopsie, a new projection system, 25 and 21, but still pretty good. The bat, 23 and 15, 301 on base percentage, 428 slug.
Oh, well, you realize projections have nothing to do with they have no determination on what happens.
Right, but
we determined you are a projections guy now. So
my point is, I think the price was influenced very heavily by the first projection system that got out.
I don't know.
And I
don't think the layman looks at projections.
Right, but the layman's not drafting right now.
No. I think Chris is right, because once the projections came out, we saw the ADP kind of go crazy, and the only ADP we had was NFBC.
All right.
So
well, hopefully it'll adjust down.
Do use projections. I will mention, the overall Fantasy Pros ADP is around 80.
Yeah, and that's where I have him at 80. Yeah. So that's fine.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So he's kind of at the tipping point for it, because there's not a big difference between 65 and 80. It's just what's the opportunity cost?
Yeah,
basically.
What are you passing on? Yeah.
And that's the reason why there's bust potential for Butler. Obviously, like I said, he could come back after the offseason and slide back into the old habits. I think the chances of that are lower than the chances of him just sustaining or mostly sustaining. And so I don't necessarily think 65 is going to be a wasted pick. I just think, I think the chances of that are less than 50%, that 65 is going to be a wasted pick. But I think what else you could get at 65 is just, there's enough additional safety there that I'd rather go that route.
Other picks going right around 65 ADP, Leodamus, who I think
a bust for me also.
Who I have a bust. Yeah.
We all have as a bust. Adley Rutschman, Devin Williams, Shota Imanaga. Actually, doesn't sound that crazy, but when you compare it to those names, then you get Mason Miller, Edwin Diaz, Yainer Diaz, Josh Naylor, Brenton Doyle.
That's a good point. That doesn't sound so bad. I think it's more just I need pitchers at that point.
Yeah.
That's probably what it is for me.
We do have to move on from Butler. I think we're all in agreement. I don't love the cost either, but I also wrote him up as a breakout because I just wanted to acknowledge.
Look, I thought about doing both. I thought about doing both, and I've done that in the past, and I've gotten yelled at, and I don't care. Because the whole point is not, this is the only thing I think can happen for a player. I'm trying to articulate the upsides and downsides in these cases.
Sure.
Okay. All right, Chris, sticking in the outfield, you have Dylan Cruz as a breakout this season.
Dylan Cruz, I love his price. Here's the thing. It took Jackson Chourio about 2 months to figure it out. It took Wyatt Langford about 5 months to figure it out. It took Jackson Merrill a couple of months to figure it out. Dylan Cruz only played 31 games last year, and the results were not great, but a lot of the underlying stuff, especially the plate discipline, Dylan Cruz, for a 21-year-old, really had a good idea of what he was doing up at the plate. He didn't swing and miss. He didn't chase. He had a good walk rate. He didn't strike out all that much. It all points to, I think, a guy who was not overwhelmed. Yeah, he needs to hit the ball harder. Yeah, he needs to elevate the ball. That's all true. But when you're that young with that approach at the plate, I think you're going to figure it out, especially when we know the underlying tools are there for Dylan Cruz to be a power hitter, to be an overall good hitter. And he stole 12 bases in 31 games. That is a crazy pace. He's not going to steal 60 bases. It goes without saying. But 30? Well, that feels more realistic than I thought it would with Dylan Cruz, who has a 93rd percentile sprint speed. So I think if he hits 20 homers, that's reasonable. And there could be 30 stolen base upside here.
Dylan Cruz ADP is 135, the 38th outfielder off the board. Chris, would you rather have Cruz or Steven Kwan? Might be format dependent.
I think I'd rather just take the chance on Cruz.
Okay. What about Cruz versus Brandon Nimmo?
Cruz.
Cruz or Adolis Garcia?
Cruz.
All right. There you go. All right. Let's go over to Scott. Bailey Ober as a breakout, and I believe bold predictions right after the season. Bailey Ober wins the Cy Young Award. How about that?
Yeah. I don't know that I want to stick with that prediction like I did the Scoop one last year.
We're holding you to every prediction you made in October of last year.
Okay. Well, here's my breakout case for Bailey Ober, who you may remember had a 3.98 ERA last year. I'm going to do the thing.
No, don't do it.
If you remove just 2 starts, but that ERA goes from 3.98 to 3.18. Now, some people hate when I do that. But I think those people don't know ball. They don't recognize, they don't appreciate the fine line between excellence and disaster. And they don't acknowledge the degree that sheer randomness plays in outcomes. It was 2 games. And one of them was his first start of the season. So there was all kinds of baggage piled on that game that could have affected the outcome. So yeah, just remove the 2 starts, 3.98 to 3.18. If you don't find that compelling for Ober, then I will point you to a fella named Shota Imanaga, who had a 2.91 ERA, so more than a full run better than Bailey Ober. Expected ERA for these two. Bailey Ober had the better one. Bailey Ober's expected ERA was 3.22 versus Shota Imanaga's 3.39. These are pitchers who profile similarly with elite control, fly ball tendencies, and average to above average strikeout ability. Similar profile. Ober actually had the better expected ERA, but his actual ERA was way worse. I think it's possible the ERAs could flip this year. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I think happenstance mostly explains the difference between the two. And Imanaga's going a lot higher than Ober.
Yeah, the ADP for Imanaga is 67. For Ober, it's 89.8. So going a few rounds later here, both are going to be great whip contributors too. So if you do plan on taking, I don't know, a Dylan Cease, a Blake Snell, a Framber Valdez, someone like that, Ober or Bryce Miller, Imanaga, Kirby, these are all whip pitchers that you also do want to draft to supplement those guys as well. I mentioned the ADP, Scott. What about Bailey Ober versus, I just mentioned a name, Bryce Miller. He's going 2 picks higher. Who would you rather have?
So that's actually a trio, Imanaga, Ober, and Bryce Miller, where I think the profile is very, very similar. I do rank Miller ahead. I mean, I rank Imanaga ahead too, but I'm most likely to end up with Ober given the going rate.
All right, let's stick with the pitchers. And Chris, over to you. 2 breakout pitchers, young-ish pitchers we have here going inside the top 150, Grayson Rodriguez and Bryan Woo.
Yeah, they're both still quite young. And Rodriguez, it's just, he has both come as advertised and been a little disappointing so far in his major league career. Good strikeout rates, not elite strikeout rates, good control, decent quality of contact metrics, but not great. It's like you look at the individual parts and it all feels like it should be better. And this is just a bet that he's going to figure it out. I don't know what exactly it looks like. Maybe it's going back to the sweeper from 2023, which had much better results than the slider. That could go a long way. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's just a bet on a guy who has, 1, been more expensive than this in recent years, and 2, just still obviously has potential. And then Bryan Woo, I just think he's really good. He's got 2 really, really good fastballs. The 4-seamer gets a lot of whiffs, gets a lot of pop-ups. Sinker, guys just beat it into the ground. They can't do anything with either of these pitches. Slider, whiff rate was down last year. If he can get back to the 2023 whiff rate, I think there's a lot of room for the strikeout rate to grow. I think in terms of skill set, there's not much difference between George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, and Bryan Woo. Those other guys are much safer. Bryan Woo had a lot of trouble staying healthy last year. But the fact that over the course of the second half of the season, he started consistently going 6 innings, started consistently throwing 90-plus pitches, something he was not doing, makes me hopeful that he can put it all together.
Yeah, there was a start for Bryan Woo on August 2nd. 7 shutout innings with 6 strikeouts against the Phillies. Could turn out to just be a turning point in his career. Final 11 starts, 3.33 ERA, .90 WHIP, 64 strikeouts to 7 walks over that stretch. And he went 6+ innings in 8 of 11 starts. Now, I feel compelled to tell you that I have Bryan Woo as a bust, and it is all injury related. I think that he is a good pitcher, but just kind of feels like a ticking time bomb here. Placed on the IL in August of 2023 with right forearm inflammation. Placed on the IL in March of last year with right elbow inflammation. And then he left to start in May with arm tightness. He was scratched from a start in June.
He was leaving every start in the first half of the season, seemingly with something.
It's scary.
Yeah.
I acknowledge
I
the
agree.
talent, and it's a great ballpark to pitch in and a great pitching development program with the Mariners. But I think the floor is nothing,
Sure.
but that's, I guess you could say that about most pitchers nowadays anyway. Scott, back to you. You have Westberg and Arrighetti on the list. We spoke about those names earlier on. There leaves one more breakout.
Mm-hmm.
Dead,
Jonathan.
This is a sleeper.
What's dead may never die, Scott. Jonathan Aranda.
Yeah, he gets going very late outside the top 400. I'll just remind you that 2 years ago at AAA, he hit .339 with 25 homers and a 1063 OPS. His walk rate was 14.7%. It would have ranked third among all major leaguers. His average exit velocity and max exit velocity compared favorably to Marcell Ozuna and Corey Seager. So he was like the perfect hitter in the minors, was Aranda. Looked like he had won the DH job for the Rays last spring. Then he broke his finger, needed surgery, came back and did not look the same. His strikeout rate was 34.5%, which we had never seen that from Aranda in his minor league career. That was between the minors and the majors. He got a little time in the majors. Ended up going back on the IL with an oblique injury. And when he came back from that, he looked like himself again. So I don't know what was going on after the surgery to his finger, if he was just rusty or if he still wasn't feeling right, but he was clearly off. It was clearly out of character. We saw him get right at the end of the season. And after returning from that oblique injury, Jonathan Aranda, between the majors and minors, hit .289 with 9 homers and a .958 OPS in 32 games. I think he'll be starting for the Rays at DH this year. And it'll finally be the year for Jonathan Aranda.
The ADP for Aranda, 351.5. So if you do play in deeper mixed roto leagues, AL only, draft and hold, Jonathan Aranda is a name that could be on your...
Oh, okay. He's moved up a lot since I wrote the article. 350, you said?
Yeah, that's according to Fantasy Pros. So there might be
Fantasy Pros. Okay.
one or two outliers that kind of prop it up.
Yeah.
That is Jonathan Aranda. Some breakouts for me. I'll just mention the names quickly. James Wood, Junior Caminero.
Caminero.
And I already feel the thing happening where we just, the home run that Caminero hit in Game 7 of the Dominican Winter League Championship, basically the other day. It's like we see these things happen in spring, and then we get so crazy, and the ADP starts going up, and
it's already too high. I can't draft Caminero. I love him, obviously. I wrote a song about him, but
to me, this is the same thing as Lawrence Butler, though. Like I trust the player. I think he's really good. I think long term he's going to turn into a 4-category stud in the way Devers and Austin Riley and Machado, those guys have kind of developed throughout their career. He's not going to get all the way there this upcoming season, but can he hit 270, 280 with 25 home runs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's possible. It's a big price tag. It's inside the top 100 pick, but I do think the upside is very high for someone like Caminero.
The funny thing is that's the only home run he hit so far in the league.
Yeah, I know the batting average.
No wonder he took his time.
Oh, he's been huge, but yeah, that was the only actual home run.
Yeah, James Wood, we've talked a lot about. We'll continue to talk about. You can read about him on the site. I did want to talk a little bit more about Spencer Schwellenbach because every year it feels like there's one pitcher that the fantasy community just kind of agrees, like, yeah, this is the guy, right? Like, this is who's going to break out this upcoming season. And I guess you could argue he already broke out because Schwellenbach was great last season with the Braves, 3.35 ERA, 104 WHIP, 9 K per 9, 13.5% swinging strike rate. His 20.8 K- walk, ranked 16th among starting pitchers with at least 120 innings. He was tied for first in the pitching plus metric. That's stuff plus with location plus kind of combined. So he's a really good pitcher. I'm just going to say that about Spencer Schwellenbach. The only downside that I see is it was a huge innings jump year over year.
103.
65 in 2023, 168 and 2/3 last year. We say that about a lot of pitchers this offseason. A lot of those other guys like Crochet and Reagans, you have to use a top 50, top 40, top 30 pick to get those guys. You know, Schwellenbach, the ADP is 93.8. It's a little high, but I just have so much faith in the skill set. So.
You know what pitcher we haven't said that about?
Who's that?
Tarek Skubal. His innings increase was 126.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Yep. Scott, just give me a yes or no. Are you willing to pay the price on Schwellenbach, top 100?
I have him as a breakout, but it's right at the tipping point, like Lawrence Butler. I don't think I've had occasion to draft him yet, but I do like him and agree with the enthusiasm.
All right.
Sorry,
well,
I said more words than that.
We're at an hour. We're going to just go long because we've got to talk about busts. And this will kind of be a nice segue into our position previews that are all going to be like 2 hours long anyway. So there you go. Busts 1.0. Chris, you already talked about Lawrence Butler. What about Luis Garcia Jr.? A name we haven't talked too much about this offseason, but we have got some questions about why do you have him as a bust?
For me, it just comes down to I liked him when he was free last year. He's decidedly not free this year, but mostly it's just I don't think he's an everyday player, and I just don't think you can bet on a guy who's not an everyday player being a top 10 round pick, which is what he is in NFBC leagues. 115 is his ADP in the month of January. And look, if the Nationals were ever going to play him every day, wouldn't it have been in the second half of a season where they were already like 9 games under 500? He only started 77% of the team's games after the break. I just don't see much reason to think that's going to change, which means that there's a hard ceiling on the counting stats that you're going to get from him. And for as much as I like him, last year is a clear outlier for his career. The underlying stats mostly back it up. Granted, he's a below average runner who stole 22 steals.
Yeah.
That feels like it could be an outlier that could come back down to earth. The Nationals they ran with abandon in the second half of last season, especially in a way that like I said, I like Dylan Cruz. I think he's going to steal bases. I don't think his 60 steal pace from last year is sustainable. I don't really think Luis Garcia is a 20-plus steal guy either. It's just a lot of weight on a very, very limited track record.
And Dylan Cruz was also 93rd percentile sprint speed.
Yeah.
Luis Garcia, 45th percentile sprint speed. So that was something that stood out to me this offseason. I think he could be more like a 20 homer, 10 to 12 steal guy.
Yeah.
And maybe they're just so aggressive that he can outrun that and whatever. We'll look dumb about it. But I do agree with you on the lefties, the splits thing. I just don't know if he's going to play every day. And, ADP is 128. So you do want an everyday player at that point in the draft. Scott, over to you. Someone who we're not sure if he will pitch I was going to say pitch every day. Obviously no one pitches every day, but Jacob deGrom, is he going to pitch every 5th day? Not so sure.
He's going to try.
He's going to try. Yeah, he's going to fail is my prediction. And I just think the ADP 51.6. So that is early round 5. I'm not sure I'd take him in round 10. This just seems absolutely loony to me. Obviously Jacob deGrom is a great pitcher. We presume he's still great as a 37-year-old coming back from Tommy John surgery. He got a small taste last year. He seemed good still. So yeah, I think it's fair to assume that when he'll pitch, he'll be really good. But he hasn't thrown even 100 innings in a season since 2019. And okay, I've made the argument in favor of like a Chris Sale last year, for instance, coming off a multi-year stretch of injuries. That doesn't mean he won't stay healthy. But in deGrom's case, I do think it means he won't stay healthy, because what also happened after 2019 is he upped his velocity like 2 miles per hour. It was already throwing plenty hard enough, but he decided he needed to throw even harder, and it was just more than his little body could take, because it's been nothing but shoulder and elbow trouble since then. I don't think his body can hold up to pitching anywhere close to a full-time starter's workload. And I think people who are expecting him to are kidding themselves. The one thing that might make me change my mind is if he comes out throwing a couple miles per hour slower, which he did
last year. Yeah.
Coming back from Tommy John surgery. And normally it'd be like, oh, that's terrible. What is he not the same after Tommy John surgery? But it might actually work in deGrom's favor if it continues. But I've seen no reports of him doing that intentionally in order to stay healthy. So I think it was just one of those things.
Yeah. The key differences between him and Chris Sale. One, Chris Sale was just a bunch of weird injuries, right? Like he fractured his rib. He broke his wrist like on a bicycle, if I'm remembering correctly. Jacob deGrom is just like when he pitches, he gets hurt. Like his elbow and his arm get hurt. That's very different. And the other difference is Chris Sale was like the 150th pick last year. And deGrom is the 50th pick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the ADP on deGrom, 51.6, as you mentioned, the 14th starting pitcher off the board. Scott has all the way down at SP 28. So very likely not getting Jacob deGrom this season. Chris, back to you. Pete Crow-Armstrong, who, like Luis Garcia, might not be an everyday player for the Cubs. The ADP inside of the top 140. I also wrote him up as a bust just because I think he's going a little bit too high. It's, Josh Lowe is 30 picks behind him. I expect a similar skill set. Tommy Edman, 60 to 70 picks behind him. I expect kind of a similar skill set.
Are we sure Pete Crow-Armstrong's better than Anthony Volpe? Like the what he did as a rookie wasn't. So like I think there's some projecting going on there just because Pete Crow-Armstrong has played less, but Anthony Volpe was a better prospect. They're about the same age, maybe a year difference, but not like a huge one. I think the profiles are very, very similar, where you're talking low double-digit home runs, probably 30-ish steals. Volpe might be a better bet for runs just because he's probably going to hit higher in the Yankees lineup than Pete Crow-Armstrong is, because Craig Counsell already came out and said he doesn't see him hitting it towards the top of the lineup. He's got to prove that he can. I know Pete Crow-Armstrong had a good second half. The last 2 months, especially, quality of contact did get better. I don't want to say I don't buy it because it's possible, right? Everybody's capable, and he's an elite athlete, good prospect, put up good minor league power numbers, especially, but that's a lot to bet on when it's a top 140 pick in Fantasy Pros ADP. I think it's even higher in NFBC's 138, so right around there. Yeah. It's just it's a big bet to make on a guy who has not proven that at all.
Yeah. I'm going to bring this back to Lawrence Butler, Pete Crow-Armstrong, but your argument against Lawrence Butler. So OPS by month for Crow-Armstrong: 778, 608, 395, 611, 933, 677. So it was really just 1 month, and 1 month for a guy with bad data. Well, Butler, it was 2 months for a guy with good data. On top of that good month, August, Crow-Armstrong, 8 walks versus 14 strikeouts. Oh, look, the plate discipline's coming around. In September, 4 walks to 30 strikeouts.
Yeah. The point I made in my column, I also have Mark Vientos as a bust. And part of it was Mark Vientos has really bad plate discipline. He was 197th among 207 players with at least 400 plate appearances in zone contact rate. His chase rate was in the 22nd percentile in that same group. Those are bad marks, but at least Mark Vientos hits the crap out of the ball. Pete Crow-Armstrong does not hit the ball very hard, and his plate discipline metrics were worse than Mark Vientos. So I think there's a chance Pete Crow-Armstrong is like a single category stolen base guy, and that is it. I would rather take Victor Robles 60 picks later. I'd definitely rather take Cedric Mullins 90 picks later than Pete Crow-Armstrong. That's one I don't get.
I do want to correct something I said about Pete Crow-Armstrong when I introduced him I said not sure if he's going to play every day because I just don't know if he's good against lefties. He's an amazing defender.
Yeah,
so
the defense, that's the
Yeah.
one thing. The playing time is insulated because he's
he's
maybe
gonna,
the best defensive center fielder.
And I always thought his prospect stock was inflated. Maybe inflated isn't the right word to use, but inflated for fantasy purposes because of that defense.
Yeah, but it will keep him on the field and he will play every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I didn't misspeak with that, but still questions about how good of a hitter is Pete Crow-Armstrong. Scott, over to you. A name Chris just mentioned, Mark Vientos. You guys are on the same page.
Yeah, Mark Vientos worked his way into the Mets lineup by striking out just 22% of the time through June 30th. He had always had major strikeout issues that kept him from breaking through in the majors. Got it down to 22% through June 30th. After June 30th, it was 33%. So it lost all those gains, made it so strikeouts are a major issue for him. Now, he did manage to hit 256 during that time. If he can keep doing that, fine, he can strike out 33% of the time. That was with a 333 BABIP, which we all know is difficult to sustain. He does hit the ball hard. He is a legit power hitter. Sometimes those guys can overcome those outlandish strikeout rates. But I would bet against it for Vientos. And at the very least, I would avoid him at his ADP because he is going too high for a guy with as much bottom out potential as he has.
He had the 7th biggest gap between his WOBA and ex-WOBA of any hitter in baseball last year as well. He had a 356 WOBA, a 331 ex-WOBA. Now, look, if he goes out and has a 331 ex-WOBA, but he's hitting third behind Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto, he just might drive in 110 runs anyway. But that feels like it could go wrong really quickly.
The ADP for Mark Vientos is 81.8. He represents a pretty big drop-off in terms of ADP at the position. Machado is the next third baseman ahead of him, 33.4. So almost 50 picks worth of difference between the 6th and 7th third baseman off the board. Jordan Westberg, just for reference, someone we all like as a breakout, is going 15 picks later than Mark Vientos. And I think we would all take him straight up.
Yep. I would rather have Westberg straight up. I would rather have Royce Lewis straight up. I would rather have Matt Chapman straight up, though you'll probably get a lot of arguments for that one.
I would not, but I would rather have Junior Caminero.
Yeah.
Chris, over to you for 2 Dodgers pitchers. Blake Snell, who has an ADP of 49.2, the SP 11, and Roki Sasaki, who I will mention, now that we're starting to get other outlet ADP, it's starting to drop down a little bit. 109.8. So it's 92 at the NFBC, but we see 127 at Yahoo and 134 on Fantrax. So, if he's around 130, is that more palatable for Roki Sasaki?
Absolutely. Yeah. That seems fine to me. It's just what we've had so far was a top 80 pick and a top 20 starting pitcher in the NFBC. And I just have not been able to make sense of that long before the concerns about him, having Tommy John surgery recommended when he was in Japan. Velocity was down 2 miles per hour last year. The fastball shape was not nearly as good as well. The results were significantly worse. But I think you can just make a case that the Dodgers rotation in general might be overrated right now because there's going to be a hard ceiling on the value of all of these guys if they're spending the entire season in a 6-man rotation, which as long as Sasaki and or Shohei Ohtani are healthy, I have to imagine they're going to be in a 6-man rotation full time, which means no 2-star weeks in your head-to-head points league. It means like 160 inning cap for all these guys. I think they're all talented. I think Blake Snell is a better bet than Sasaki, but the thing with Blake Snell, and I say it every time we talk about him, you have to know going in that you've got the stomach for it, because the worst thing you can do is draft Blake Snell in the 4th or 5th round like he's going right now, and then get frustrated when things go bad, as they inevitably do. He has had an ERA north of 5 in June in 3 of the past 4 seasons. The other one, he had an ERA north of 5 in late May. This happens with Blake Snell. You have to know that you can handle the ride. And if you can't handle the ride, don't get on. And I'm not going to get on at that price. way too many things can go wrong for a guy who has thrown 130 innings twice in 9 seasons.
But when he's done that, Chris.
But when he's done that, he's won Cy Young. Right.
He's won
Yeah.
Cy Young.
The upside, I can see the case for it. And if you want to make that case, that's fine.
Yeah.
But you have to know that you have the stomach to stick with Blake Snell, because every year for the past 4 years, people have dropped Blake Snell in May and June. And every single time they have regretted it. And you have to know.
I know.
That you are going to be able to live with the bad times, because they're going to be there.
I did it last year. I know I can do it, and I'll do it again. So those exact numbers, past 4 seasons for Blake Snell, April through June, 4.15 ERA, 139 WHIP. July through September, 2.56 ERA, 112 WHIP.
So buy low on July 1st.
Yeah, well, that would be.
Why don't they just make the whole season out of the summer?
Last 3 years, by the way, Blake Snell, 282. This is overall, not doing the breaking up the season thing. Overall, last 3 seasons, 282 ERA, 116 WHIP, 12 K per 9. I'm trying not to overcomplicate it with him and just look at those numbers and say, yeah, that's an ace. But it's nerve wracking. I am more with you on Roki Sasaki being a bust. I think him signing with the Dodgers killed whatever enthusiasm I might have had for him in 2025, because that was the one team who doesn't need him to throw a pitch to make it to the playoffs. Like, they're virtually guaranteed a playoff spot without him throwing a pitch. So the whole season is going to be about development and preservation. And so I don't think the fantasy impact is going to be much. I also want to share this stat about Roki Sasaki that it's actually the number 1 line item in my article, 60 defining stats for 2025. Roki Sasaki, it's well known.
Great article, by the way.
Thank you. 2 mile per hour drop in fastball velocity last year. It was still 96.8, but 2 mile per hour drop. How impactful was that for him? Well, according to Jonathan Mayo of MLB.com, his whiff rate on that fastball went from 24%, which is akin to Chris Sale, to 13%, which is akin to Chris Flexen. So it became a really bad pitch with that 2 mile per hour drop. Will the Dodgers regain that velocity? Is his splitter so good that it doesn't even matter? Reasonable questions, but more reason for doubt.
All right, Scott, back to you. Take us home. Quick rapid fire. 3 names: Bryce Terang, Kerry Carpenter, Ryan Pepio, all on your Breakouts 1.0.
On my busts.
Bust. That would make
1.0.
sense. Yes. Bust 1.0.
So the case with Bryce Terang is pretty simple. First half last year, or I say it's pretty simple, but now I can't find the numbers. 1 second. First 3 months last year for Bryce Terang, he hit 292. Final 3 months, he hit 214. And I will say that the underlying numbers more support the 214. And in fact, he also hit 218 as a rookie in 2023. So I think that's closer to the true Bryce Terang. I think people who draft him on last year's overall stats are going to be disappointed. Next up is Kerry Carpenter. Chris mentioned the platoon issue for Luis Garcia. He doesn't trust that he's going to play enough against left-handers. I think it's even more certain for Kerry Carpenter not going to play enough against left-handers. He had 28 at-bats against them last year. He's in his late 20s while Garcia's in his early 20s. His manager is AJ Hinch, who doesn't shy away from platoons. The Tigers are actually contending, so they're not going to want to experiment with Kerry Carpenter against left-handers. And people are drafting him as if he's not a platoon bat. If you draft him as a platoon bat, he's basically Jock Peterson. He has outfield eligibility and Peterson doesn't, but performance-wise, that's who Kerry Carpenter is. Peterson is going so much later. Kerry Carpenter's being overrated. And finally, Ryan Pepio. I
wanted to have him as a breakout.
Right. I like the pitcher in theory, but the scenario I like Pepio in is not the scenario where he's pitching at George M. Steinbrenner Field, the spring training facility in Tampa, where the Rays are forced to play this year. Same dimensions as Yankee Stadium, but in that thick, humid air, that's going to allow the ball to just slice through it like crazy, like butter. And so it's going to be even a more homer-friendly park than Yankee Stadium, one would think. Perhaps vastly more. Pepio, among pitchers with at least 130 innings last year, had the 10th highest fly ball rate. So it just seems like a very toxic mix. That fly ball rate in that stadium. His xFIP, which kind of overemphasizes fly ball rate, was over 4 last year. And I think Pepio's ERA is going to play to that xFIP this year. It's going to be over 4.
All right. If you want more picks, sleepers, breakouts, and busts 1.0, again, you can read all of those articles on the site, cbssports.com/fantasy/baseball. We are going to wrap there for Scott, Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again next week with position previews. Bye-bye.